local history, local culture, local events, your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
Hi there, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show. We're talking to Ron Moshier. Ron is 35-year veteran at the Utica newspapers, retired now, but he's out with a book. And the book is a great book, Lazzaro, The Man and His Machine. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, we're going to say welcome. Good to see you.
Thanks, Joe. Great to be here.
All those years you covered sports, and you covered racing, part of your repertoire. What gave you the idea to do a book on Lou Lazzaro?
Well, the backstory, Joe, is growing up as a kid in Richfield Springs, little town. I was the oldest of 5 children, and my late father, Ron Sr., and my mom, Violet, they would pack us up in the station wagon, all 5 of us, and head to Fonda Speedway on a Saturday night. It was about a 50-minute drive, and I remember as a kid I used to pray that it wouldn't rain, that it wouldn't get rained out. We might get there late, we might not get a great seat, but I wound up being a fan. And my first impression of Lou Lazzaro was not that positive, only because I can tell you that I wasn't even in my teens yet. But I wound up being a stock car racing fan, and Lou Lazzaro won almost every Saturday night. So that's sort of, I rooted for anybody but him. I hate to admit that, but I was 12 years old.
Well, wasn't that the case of, before I get to that, how good was he? How good was Lou Lazzaro?
One of the best of his time in the 60s and the 70s. And I, in my opinion, one of the best of all time because he was unique. To me, he did more with less, meaning he was always underfunded, perpetually underfunded, worked on a shoestring budget, got the most out of what he had or what he didn't have, and still managed to win. And he won on dirt tracks like Fonda Speedway, on asphalt tracks like Utica Rome Speedway, which is now dirt, but back in the 60s and 70s, that was a tiny asphalt oval, and Lazzaro was the man to beat. And he did it his way. He was different. He was unique. He was one of a kind.
He won so much. You tell me if you don't think this is an accurate analogy. I think a lot of people, not so much now because they haven't been winning, but a lot of people would root against the New York Yankees baseball team because they were just so powerful, won so much. They didn't like it, and they would root against the Yankees. I almost get the feeling the same thing with Lou Lazzaro.
Oh my God, it was. As a kid, there were times, and we're talking the early 60s, mid 60s, where Lazzaro would win so often when he pulled up into victory lane or in front to get the checkered flag. Some fans who probably were overserved, Joe, would throw cans at him.
Really?
Yeah, because he won again. Obviously, as a 12-year-old, I didn't do that, but and I didn't boo him, but I rooted for somebody else to win because he won so often, it was almost a given. In 1969, he won 27 races. At Fonda Speedway alone, 16 feature races. He won 11 of them, and he finished second in 3 others, and totally dominated. And that was when we were going as kids every Saturday night.
What was the key for him? As you say, he didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of sponsorship. Is that what?
Oh no, not at all. He didn't have many major sponsors. Now he never really had one major sponsor like a Jerry Cook or like a Richie Evans from Rome, who maybe 10 years after Lazzaro's best years, they were the big name drivers in our area. They're both in the NASCAR Hall of Fame, in fact, Richie Evans and Jerry Cook, Rome rivals. But Lazzaro, he had plenty of supporters who would come here and there. He had his sons, Peter and Lou Jr. He had Junior Bianco, who was his crew chief, who's still lives in the area. He had his own garage, I think, on South Street in Utica, and he was Louis' crew chief from the beginning to the end, and he was a big part of it too. There were just so many committed supporters who would give $5 here, $10 there, or come and work on a Wednesday night on the car to get it ready for Friday, Saturday, Sunday racing.
So, and it was the car that he won. I saw him race a few times. It was looked like an old jalopy that he was racing in. Is that a good description? I don't.
Well, for the most part, it was homemade. I mean, back then, most drivers did that. But he built it himself. He towed it to the track himself. He raced. He towed it back home and get ready for the next day. And you know, there were times when his cars looked like they were ready for the junkyard or the boneyard, because he wasn't in it for the show. He wasn't in it for the glory. He was there to do a job, to win, and come home and do it again the next day. And you know, he wound up. He was one of the first ones to be a full-time race car driver. That's what he did.
He didn't have the sponsorship. He didn't have new cars or equipment. He didn't have a big team. How did he win? What was his key to his success?
I would say he was cool and calculating. I think he won with guts and guile. He wasn't known as a showman or as a you know, a hothead. I had some drivers in the book tell me who raced against him, said that all of a sudden there was Lou. It was as if he came up out of the ground and was passing them. You know, and he wasn't a rough rider. You know, there are drivers back then and today known for their aggressiveness. His was controlled aggression. He didn't have enemies on the track, and the book really shows that. I think that there are some local drivers who are still alive around here who have the utmost respect for him and revered him, really.
I enjoyed reading the book very much, and I'm not a big race car fan, but I like the way you put it together. And you don't have to be in love with racing to enjoy the book. You tell the personal side of him. I think that people who really aren't race car aficionados could enjoy this. You did a nice job with it.
I appreciate it, Joe, and that's probably the best thing you could say to me, because for years, working at the OD and now as a columnist at the Daily Sentinel, you know, I tell people I was a sports writer, but I really write about people.
Yeah.
And, you know, to me, this was a human interest story, and I know the publishing company outside of Boston, Coastal 181, their tagline is reading for racers. But I'm hoping this book is more of a human interest story too, because it's about him and his machines. You know, it's about the man
and his family.
And his family, who, I mean, obviously are a big part of it.
Yeah.
So.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with Ron Moshier. Ron is the author of the new book, Lazzaro, The Man and His Machines. We'll tell you how you can get the book in just a second. Short break, right back. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Ron Moshier is our guest. Ron, longtime sports writer for the Observer-Dispatch, now for the Daily Sentinel. And he's out with a new book, and it's about Lou Lazzaro, who is really a legend in this area. What do you think, Ron, was his peak time? Late 60s, maybe?
Yes, but then late 70s. You know, another thing that made him a folk hero, I think, Joe, with so many fans in the Utica Rome area and in the Albany area, was that he was a survivor.
Yeah.
I mean, he in the in the 70s, he had Crohn's disease, and he had an intestinal problem that wound up hospitalizing him for a whole summer almost, and he was near death. He was transported from a couple hospitals and wound up having emergency surgery, and still came back and raced later that year in the fall.
Yeah.
And nobody expected him to come back, and I mean, he was aging then. Came back and won a lot of races. And then later on, open heart surgery, came back from that and won again. I mean, he won his last race when he was 64 years old at Fonda. It was his 113th win there. So.
And he died at a track. Didn't I recall reading that in the book?
At Fonda.
At Fonda,
At
yeah.
Fonda.
Yeah. Not racing, but.
He raced that night.
Yeah.
Pulled out of the feature, the main event, midway through, and pulled in the pits. Didn't have mechanical problems. Wasn't feeling well. Didn't pull into his pit area like he usually does. Had to be pushed in, and then his daughter Mimi came over and knew that something was wrong. The EMTs came, wound up, before he got in the ambulance, and it's in the book in the final chapter, about one of his last things he did was he was sitting in his truck before he got in the ambulance, and a young boy came over and he signed an autograph for him, and then wound up leaving Fonda Speedway, where he was king, in an ambulance, and died a couple days later of a stroke.
He was how old?
65. It was the year 2000, and that's one of my regrets, Joe. That it took me 22 years to say I want to write a book about him. I wish it was maybe 2 years, because so many of the great drivers who I could have interviewed, who raced with him and against him, I could have interviewed, were already gone. But I was able to. I think I did probably 85 to 100 interviews with drivers and fans and family members for sure. And one of the greatest, Dave Lape, who recently passed away. There's some sidebars in the book featuring a driver, a promoter, and the driver, Dave Lape from Kanjahari. I was so fortunate prior to his death this past year. I sat with him for 2 or 3 hours. He was probably the driver who was closest to Louis. In fact, his very first win at Fonda Speedway, it was rain shortened, and he beat Louis. And Lazzaro wound up second. The race was red flagged because of rain, and they got on the home stretch, and Lazzaro complained that, hey, we should finish this race next week. That the race isn't over. Labe, who hadn't won yet, he spoke up and said, hey, the rules are, if it's past halfway point, the race is official.
Right.
And Louis kind of respected him for that, and that was the start of a great friendship. And I was so fortunate to speak with Dave Lape, because him and his wife are who have set up the Fonda Speedway Museum behind the grandstands. It's a phenomenal place. If you love history, you don't even have to love racing. If you love history, go to Fonda Speedway on a Saturday at 3 o'clock. Free admission to the museum, and there's a big section on Lou Lazzaro and other local drivers. Jimmy Luke from many years ago was from Utica. It's worth the trip. It's open Saturdays at 3. It's like 3 hours, 4 hours before the races begin. You don't have to buy a ticket. You just go right in.
I note that you relied on a lot of Observer Dispatch articles.
Without a doubt.
You talked to a ton of people, including his former wife, yes?
Yes, Philomena, Phil lives in California, and they were married for 20-some years, had 5 children, and 3 of them now live in California as well. The 2 of the boys who were on the pit crew a lot, Peter lives in Frankfurt, and Lou Jr. lives in Georgia now. And they both have replica tribute cars of their fathers. And in fact, at the book signing events that we're having at Fonda Speedway, Utica Rome, and Albany Saratoga Speedway, Peter is scheduled to be there with one of his father's replica tribute cars, and is going to pace the field around the track. It should
Oh,
be great.
nice.
Yeah.
What are the dates of those signings?
The first one is at Fonda Speedway, and rightly so, because that's where his number's retired. His number 4 is retired. That's on a Saturday night, June 10th. And like I said, I think it would open at 3 because that's when the museum opens. Racing doesn't start until 3 or 4 hours later. But after that, we go to Utica, Rome on a Friday night, June 23rd. And then the third one that's scheduled is August 4th it's a Friday night at Albany Saratoga Speedway in Malta, not far from Saratoga Springs. So I'm pretty sure Peter will have his car there all 3 of those nights. And there are other events that aren't scheduled yet, but at places where Lazzaro won during his heyday would be Fulton Speedway, Orange County Speedway in Middletown. That's the site of one of his biggest wins. He won at Eastern States 200 in 1978 when he ran out of gas and had to he made it to the finish line, and then they had to push him into victory lane. I think there's a great photo in the book of that.
Yeah.
I was lucky too. So many people helped me dig up old photos. It was that was the publisher. The publisher is Lou Boyd. People around here may not know him, but he's a former race car driver himself. I think he was born in Schenectady, but he raced at Fonda Speedway. And the publishing company is Coastal 181. His race car number used to be 181, and he got it from a local driver here, Madison, New York, a guy named Pepper Eastman, who unfortunately was killed in an auto racing accident at Fonda Speedway. And Lou Boyd was a fan of his, so he adopted his number 181, and now it's they've written hundreds of books about racing. Another one about Richie Evans from Rome.
Yeah,
that's
that's a
great book.
If somebody wants to get it, how do they get the book?
Coastal181.com. It's a great website, and the people there. Lou Boyd's actually written. The reason why I knew him and had the connection was I was a contributor when he wrote one of his writers wrote a book about Utica Rome Speedway. The 50-year anniversary came out a few years ago. I had a sidebar in it, and so when I was digging through my notes and everything at home over the winter, last winter, it's like, geez, I should write a book about Lou Lazzaro. So I contacted him, wrote a couple chapters, and fortunately he bought it.
And how much does the book sell for?
$29.95.
$29.95.
And there's some great old-time photos I think people
Well, I was going to talk, when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about those photos. Ron Moshier is our guest. He's out with his new book, Lazzaro, The Man and His Machines, and he really was, Lou Lazzaro, a legend around here. Short break, right back. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Ron Moshier's our guest, longtime sports writer in our area. In fact, we worked together for about 20 years. Yeah, and back in the day when you had some good names, great names really, John Pederesi and Les Diven and Phil Spartano and
Bill Higdon.
Bill, that's the name I was searching for, Bill Higdon, just some great people. Anyway, Ron's out with his new book. It's only been out for a couple weeks, and he's nice enough to come in to talk about it. You can get it by going to, what was the website?
Coastal181.com.
Okay. And it sells for
$29.95.
$29.95. And Ron's going to be doing some signings down at Fonda and Utica Rome and
Albany Saratoga.
Albany Saratoga.
Right.
One of the things that I was interested in the book was his personal life. And as you said, he was married, had 5 kids, but he and his wife married. They were, was it Wetmore School or?
Yeah, they grew up. He grew up on Gilbert Street in East Utica, and not far from. This is before my time, but Bennett's Field Speedway, a little tiny dirt track.
Yeah.
And that's where he used to go as a kid. And well, you know, Mosier's auto body shop
still,
right on Albany Street, still booming business there. So many people told me that Vinnie Moshier was sort of like the brains of the outfit from the start. And there were 4 partners. Vinnie was one of them. And Louis hung around the garage all the time and wound up quitting school and eventually going into racing full time. But that's how he got into it. And, you know, one of Louis's sisters is still alive, Kiarina, they call her Aunt Corey, but she lives in Clinton, and I spent 2 or 3 hours sitting with her and her husband talking about Louis, what kind of kid Louis was. And there are stories in the book about him getting some honor for saving a dog on the railroad tracks there in East Utica. He actually helped save his dad's own father's life. Dug with his hands. His father was working on a pipeline or something down by Genesee Street. This is years ago, obviously. Cave in, and Louis with his bare hands, he was working with him, helped uncover him before he was buried alive. There are a couple other stories that as kids growing up, I mean, he was one of those guys that raced in the streets.
Now he quit school at a young age, and then his wife quit school. She said, "I don't want to be here without him."
Right, Philomena, and she stayed with him for over 20 years, and with the 5 children. One of them, Danny, the youngest boy, was born in 1969. They called him the good luck charm, or you know, the miracle baby in 1969, because that was Louis' winningest year when he had 27 wins. And in fact, a couple of the boys said to me, you know, 1969, people remember it for you know, walking on the moon, for Woodstock. Well, Lazzaro's, the racing family, they remember it for Dad winning 27 times that year. So, and you know, later on in life, Louis had another daughter named Melissa, Mimi, who now she just got honored in the past year for a Woman in Racing Award at Wheat Sport Speedway. She was honored because she now works in racing, is at Fonda Speedway every Saturday night, and I actually sat with her for hours talking about her dad. I mean, she was tiny when he was winning big, and this was after Philomena and him separated, and she has some great memories. And nowadays, most of the time, she sings the national anthem at Fonda Speedway, where her father was king, where her father's ashes were spread around the racetrack after the week after he passed away, and where his number 4 stands above what they call the Track of Champions. It's the only number in the modified division that's been retired. And I mean, people who go to Fonda Speedway every Saturday night, they don't have to be as old as I am. They know who Lou Lazzaro was.
When he and his wife parted company, it was interesting to me because, I mean, here she was saying, as you say in the book, I'm going to quit school too because I don't want to be there without him.
Right.
And then after how many years were they together?
20 some, I think.
Yeah. Did the racing drive them apart?
Some of the kids say yes, some say not really. But I mean, once they had 5 children, Philomena would stay at home, and Louis would go racing and come back, and she would have dinner for him. It's in the book, 2 in the morning, you know, back from a late night at Fonda Speedway, and the kids would treat him like, Dad's home, did you win, did you win, you know. I think, you know, it got tough because that's what he was doing for a living, and if he didn't win, he had to bring home money because he was putting the money back into the race car. That's
did he get? I don't think he got rich.
Oh my gosh, no, never. Like I said, He did have some people fans who happened to have money. Mike McKeon from the Schenectady area wound up being a sponsor for him later in life in his 60s, and stuck with him through thick and thin back when it was tough. It was tough to compete against. Louis wound up racing against time and racing against money. And nowadays, if you watch any NASCAR on TV, you got to have money.
Right.
You got money wins. When Lou Lazzaro was the man to beat, it was more, in my opinion, and in so many people's opinions, it was the man and his machine, not the money behind it. And just Louis knew how to put them together and how to win with them.
Somebody suggested, I read in the book, that maybe his cars didn't look that great intentionally.
Funny, almost like it was a ruse.
Yeah.
It got so Louis didn't care how they looked. In fact, there's a few quotes by him in the book about that. He just cared how they ran, and if they won. And there were times, I mean, there's the legendary story when he went down to Martinsville, Virginia for a huge race where all the big names, including Jeff Bodine, who wound up being a NASCAR superstar, he went to Martinsville to get in line to get in the pits to enter the race, and the pit steward and the officials were going to turn him away because his car looked like a jalopy. Looked like it was ready for the junkyard, not for a big race. And there were other drivers and other officials stepped in and said, no, he's one of the winningest drivers in the Northeast. You got to let him in. So they let him in. I mean, Louis wound up racing at Daytona. Finished 9th in his first race there. So.
Great book, Ron. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, great book.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
Also, give quickly where people can get the book.
It's coastal181.com.
Okay. And that's going to do it for us this week. This went by awful fast. I wish we had another hour. But we'll be back next week. We'll do it all again. Don't forget cnyhomepage.com. There's lots of good stuff there. Until next time, take care of yourself, everybody.